WNST, whatever you're celebrating out there. I have my ho-ho purple Santa hat on here because it is Festivus in these here parts, and it allows me to stretch out and have a lengthier holiday conversation and chat with my favorite holiday chat partner. Luke Jones joins us now live via satellite on the fields in Owings Mills all week, and standing by with that WNST text brought to you by Coons Ford to Security Boulevard, ready to trade Manny Machado to somewhere, right, Luke? I mean, anywhere. A lot going on here, man. I've been writing about the ghost of Baltimore football past, present, and future. I know you've been reading about it. And I guess before we even get going on the Colts game or the holidays or that crazy Steelers-Patriot thing or Kansas City versus Jacksonville, and I'll be talking to guests here all this week, I just want to say thank you to you for helping me make this series so good, you and everyone else, because I think sort of the mental volleying that I've been doing and hearing people's thoughts and voices on Facebook and on the radio and on Twitter, and seeing outrage and seeing reason, seeing facts and seeing fiction, seeing pro-military, anti-military, left, right, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, I hate Bisciotti. I've heard everything, right? I feel like your thoughts have been the strongest in my conscience for all of this, because you and I have given 100 reasons why there are going to be empty seats this week, and I think we can all agree it's kind of a shame at this point in that they're 8-6 and it's Christmas week and the Colts are coming, and this is where football is right now. But they've also earned this through a lot of Ray Rice and ticket prices and all of the things that have gone on in the world over the last 22 years.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit over the last few years. I mean, I can go back to 2013 and 2014 when I started, and I'm just talking about my vantage point from the press box, started noticing a few more empty seats here and there than you wouldn't see in 2010 and 2011. And at that point, it's just kind of something you make a mental note about. Maybe there's a tweet thrown up at some point to kind of pass along that observation. But I think this has been a more gradual thing. And then, of course, what happened over the summer with Colin Kaepernick and Steve Bisciotti making his comments, and then the organization deciding not to sign him, and then what happened in London with players kneeling during the anthem, those two factors kind of were the exclamation point for a certain segment of Ravens fans. And, I mean, that's their right. That's their opinion. That's their choice. But I think it's very clear. I think it's very obvious. There are so many different tentacles to this. There are so many different reasons at work here. I don't think all of them are permanent, mind you, but I think there are a lot of factors at work here. But I'll say this much, the football team winning the next two games and getting into the playoffs, I think that's something that will certainly help buck this trend. I don't think it'll fix it permanently by any stretch, but I do think it's something that will help, rather than if this team were to stub its toe against Cincinnati next week and miss the playoffs for a fourth time in the last 5 years. I do think winning is a big part of this. It's not the only part, but I do think that is a factor that's something the Ravens can control here over the next couple weeks. And then moving forward, you get into that conversation that, frankly, a lot of NFL cities are having right now as far as what can we do to improve the product, the perception of the product, improve the number of people going to games. Ratings, even though they're still better than just about anything else on TV, still not as great as they were, say, a few years ago. But part of that's just TV in general and the world that we're living in going into 2018. But I think the Ravens can calm some of this conversation by taking care of business the next couple weeks and getting back into the playoffs for the first time in 3 years.
You know what's weird for me, and I don't deal with this because I don't take phone calls from yahoos anymore, but I do see it out on Twitter. It's almost, and you're a huge wrestling fan, right? And this whole, sort of Trumpian, McMahonian, Steinbrennerian, Angelosian sort of heel turn thing against Bisciotti or against the organization interception, or if you're the guy who's wanted John Harbaugh fired for 9 consecutive years now, after wanting Billick fired for 9 consecutive years before that, and you know that guy, and you know it's not that guy. You know those guys and those ladies and those people, because I see it every week. I mean, how many people hate Flacco? He sucks. He sucks. I told you he sucks. Every time he throws an interception, he sucks again. We need to bench him. We need a better quarterback. We need to go get Tom Brady. If we just would have gotten Peyton Manning instead of Denver, if we just wouldn't have given him $25 million, all of that stuff, you're like vested in his next interception, and here comes his next playoff start all of a sudden, right? In a 10-6 year, and there really is this sort of weird WWE thing that goes on after the last Super Bowl, and I would agree with you that sort of the tentacles of the early part of the exit, when you first started to see some empty seats or whatever, it was almost like after the parade, the second parade, there was this, well, I'm done. It's sort of like the morning after, you've finally been chasing the girl and you're like, okay, I won. Now what? Now what do I do? I won. And maybe it was a reason to start staying home. Maybe everybody was broke from going to New Orleans. I don't know. But there definitely is a negativity and a circle of that when the team is struggling and people wanting to be pissed about something, quite frankly. And I've seen this in sports fans for 25 years. It's never been why I've been a fan or why you've been a fan. But there is a segment of that goes on, and I find that to be different than maybe 20 years ago, where root for the home team, and sort of that more cliche old world approach to this, as opposed to, you owe me 14-2, you owe me a dominant, flawless, penalty-free, all the above. Nobody can go to jail. Nobody can be arrested. Everybody's got to stay on time. We can never have an offsides penalty. Nobody can ever get hurt. A coach can never make a bad decision. No one can ever miss a kick. A safety in a corner can never get beat. The expectation really is kind of crazy in real time as it plays out. And, when the team's 4-5 or whatever it is, I think it's easy to sort of jump off the boat, especially if you don't have the money invested in the tickets, right? I think it's different if you got $300, into Saturday's game and the tickets are sitting in your desk and you can't find anybody to use them. That's where we are right now, and that's a really weird, different kind of world that nobody wants to go down and sit in the seats. That's weird to me. That's scary.
It is, but a lot of what you just brought up, let's be clear, this isn't unique to Baltimore. This is the same conversation that every NFL city is having. And yes, I guarantee you, go look at how Tom Brady's played the last few weeks. He hasn't played so well. There's some nut jobs in New England right now talking about Brady being finished, even though he's going to be MVP of the league most likely. This happens everywhere. Do I think the segments of this fan base are spoiled? Absolutely. I've had so many people tweet to me, not just this year, I'm talking going back to 2014, 2015, and say, the fans deserve better than this. And I just felt like saying, wait a second, look.
Because Matt Elam and Brashad Perryman suck, essentially, right?
I've been as critical as anyone in town as far as the draft's not being up to snuff here recently, and some questionable contracts given out, cap mismanagement. There have been issues. There's no doubt about that. And, I've talked about the possibility of there being some changes regardless of whether the Ravens make the playoffs or not. Now, I'm not talking extreme changes, but some tweaking, so to speak. But that said, I also have recognized all along that the Ravens here are a victim of their own success. They've won 2 Super Bowls in under 2 decades. They are 5 years removed from a Super Bowl, which isn't that recent anymore, but we're not talking about ancient history either. So there needs to be some levity here. There needs to be some taking a deep breath and acknowledging that, okay, over the last 5 years, it has been mediocre because, look at the record. It's been right around 500 since the Super Bowl. But that said, we're not talking about the Cleveland Browns here. We're not talking about the Bengals in the 90s and the early portion of the new millennium. We're not talking about the Orioles from 1998 through 2011. I mean, this is still a team that's been competitive. They've had one losing season under John Harbaugh. Let's remind everyone of that. They've had one losing season. Now, I know 8-8, no one's happy with that, but 8-8 still brings you to competitive football and the games mattering in Week 16 and Week 17. We're not talking about playing out the string in all of these seasons.
And let's be honest, my brother. Okay, let's pretend the team just came off the Mayflowers or over the Cleveland Bridge here tomorrow. If the next 22 years went the way the last 22 years went, and look, and that includes Ray Lewis in handcuffs and Ray Rice and Jamal Lewis and the off the field issues and the good, the bad, and the ugly. But two parades: a Joe Flacco, a Ray Lewis, a John Ogden, a Brian Billick. Throw me in a couple of Shannon Sharps and a couple of Matt Burks and a couple of Rod Woodsons. Hell yeah. Deion Sanders, hell yeah. I'll take that all day long. Give me that for the Orioles over the next 22 years. Give me that for the Caps, the Terps, the Wizards. Any franchise, any Patriot fan should be willing to take that right now over the next 22 years. So, that's the part where I do get defensive about all of this, and I do get a little chippier as to, what more could they do? I mean, what more do you want them to do?
They're not the Patriots. That's about the only thing you could say. They're not the Patriots. The Patriots are one of the greatest dynasties, maybe the greatest dynasty when you when you really consider the fact that this is the salary cap era, and it's not the 1950s or the 60s or the 70s where you could just keep teams together. Okay, they're not the Patriots. That's fine. Joe Flacco's not Tom Brady. John Harbaugh's not Bill Belichick. Let's acknowledge that and then move on, right? I mean, it's that simple. So beyond that, you're right. I mean, if your standard is to be the Patriots, then, well, you know what? You're going to be disappointed in any sport you follow because that's very, very rare. And as soon as Tom Brady and Bill Belichick decide they have, that they're moving on, and then Brady's going to go live with his supermodel wife and just enjoy the rest of his life, and Belichick's going to be out on a boat and watching lacrosse and not coaching anymore, the Patriots are going to be just like everyone else then, too. So, but beyond that, while we acknowledge that there is a certain segment of this discussion that just relates to the Ravens have spoiled this fan base for a long time, and with it not being quite as good over the last 5 years, there's a certain reaction to that. I do think there's a more constructive conversation, though, that, okay, what do you do as you're entering 2018 and we're seeing attendance dwindle around the league from just talking about butts in seats. We're not talking about tickets sold yet. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out moving forward. But, these organizations, the NFL in general, they need to figure this out as far as what their model is going to be. Fans are not dumb and naive to the fact that these are multi-billion-dollar television contracts, that that money might be reallocated because you have to figure out streaming and different things like that, but that money is going to be there in some capacity. But, something you and I have talked about a lot is not cheap to go to these games, and it's certainly not cheap to be a season ticket holder, and you compound that with parking and concessions and all of that. These teams, and it's not just the Ravens, but this is a league-wide and really all across
industry-wide, sure, everywhere.
What do you do to continue to have fans in arenas and stadiums? Because I think that's part of the experience as well. Even if you're watching a game at home, you tend to enjoy it more if you have a really lively, sold-out crowd. I mean, whether you're talking about Game 6 of the NBA Finals or March Madness or, whatever, or just a typical Big Ten Tuesday night college basketball game. I mean, it's always better when you have fans in the seats, but if you're struggling with that now, the idea isn't to blame the fans, it's to adjust. And we've talked about this with the Orioles the last few years as far as why there haven't been people going to games late in the season when they've been in contention. Well, they didn't really do anything to provide incentives to get people out to the ballpark. That's your job. It's not just to say, hey, fans, why aren't you coming? And yes, there was a certain discussion about that. And we talked about that with the Orioles. We're talking about that with the Ravens right now. But it really does become a challenge of what exactly do you do? What do you tweak? How do you adjust your business model to try to entice more people to want to be in the stadium rather than watching the games at home? I still think, and this goes for people that are protesting, the NFL, and say they're done and they're not watching the Ravens. I still suspect, and I'm sure there are some people that have followed through on that, but I suspect there are plenty of people who maybe aren't going to the games, but are still certainly watching them at home. And I'd like to see what the local television numbers are. And I know Nielsen ratings are not a complete picture by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd be really curious to see how many fans are at least still engaged watching at home, even if they're not going to the stadium. But this is something they got to figure out. And if it means you need to lower concession prices, and I know that's something the Falcons have kicked around as they've opened their new stadium. If it's that, so be it. If it's trying to figure out a way to have cheaper tickets in the long run, then so be it. I mean, I'm not going to cry the blues for an industry that makes billions and billions of dollars across the board, but it really is a case of what can you do to continue to want to get people to go to the stadium rather than watch it at home, where they can watch Red Zone and they can check their fantasy team and they can be nice and warm and they can have
the beer's cold and cheap.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear here. It is a very good experience watching the game at home. I understand
Everyone begins the conversation with that, no matter what. I mean, first off, it's a good experience, and it's a free experience, And I say that to my wife all the time now that Tom Petty's dead, right? Like, literally, right? Like, staying at home and putting a Tom Petty DVD in is sometimes better than getting in the car and driving 90 minutes to Philadelphia on a 90-degree night in a thunderstorm and paying $125 and dealing with the crowd and then getting in the car at midnight and driving home and getting home at 1 a.m. Maybe sometimes just flipping the DVD in is the way to go, right? Like, maybe that makes a good Tuesday night for a guy of my age. And I would say the same thing on the football experience. I really do enjoy the travel part of it, as weird as it is, and as a glutton for punishment as I am for a 4 a.m. flight out of Cleveland, and you and I do it in Pittsburgh and Green Bay. I love that experience. But I would say the home experience, being 6 blocks away, is okay for me. But I could sit home and watch the game this week and like it, pretty much as well, right? So I get it, but I also know those tickets need to sell, and those seats need to be moved, and more than that. And I brought this up with Ed Frankovic, and I haven't brought this up with you. I don't think I've even brought this up with you like privately on our travels and our chats at games or our press box chatter and what we don't talk about on the radio, but. And it's different for you because you're in the press box. That's where you experience the game. Right. But for me, and I know you were a season ticket holder, the amount of noise, the amount of chaos that we used to create for Peyton Manning, for Andy Dalton, for Carson Palmer, for Ben Roethlisberger, for Andrew Luck in the Ray comeback game and the Rays' last ride. Like that part of the sound of that stadium, Luke, and I know you were a baby, and this is where I want to put you on my lap and burp you a little bit, but that sound over on 33rd Street of Eddie, and the roar when the ball went out over the fence, and that COLTS that roared under that concrete out on 33rd Street, that transferred football-wise. We're all familiar with the chain gang and the move the chains and the defense and what the Rex Ryan defense felt like here, and the Ray Lewis and the sound of the squirrel and all of that. And if you're an Oriole fan and you have open air press box there, Luke, things are actually louder in the press box there because of the way the sound reverberates. The Delman Young thing's the only moment in time in Oriole history where that place sounded or sounds in any way like 33rd Street. But this Ravens sound that's gone is almost like the sound of my mother's voice being gone. Like going into a stadium with 48,000 people this Saturday and watching Jacoby whatever the hell his name is, run around and operate his offense when the team's 8-6 and the purple Festivus light should be hung, and I'm wearing my ho-ho hat on camera, Luke. That is something that better return, that sound and that vibration and that ability to affect the game. I mean, that's clearly missing, and that is to the detriment of the football team, and that's a damn shame.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you on that. I mean, I can remember being there for Tony Banks throwing the touchdown to Shannon Sharp in Week 2 in 2000. I was in the upper deck. Interestingly enough, my foot was in a boot. I had a stress fracture. It was my senior year of high school. Was sidelined from playing football, but I was in that upper deck, and it was shaking. It absolutely was shaking. Probably the loudest I can remember, maybe pregame 2006, the playoff game against Indy, which was absolutely amazing until the game started and you realized that they weren't going to score any points against Indy.
Dude, were you at any of the Pittsburgh playoff games in Pittsburgh in the upper deck? In the real seats there. Have you ever sat there?
I was for the 2008, the first AFC Championship game.
The Flacco pick.
Yeah.
So when the Flacco pick happened, like you've seen that NFL commercial where they show Lambeau Field and they show all the video in the stands and whatnot. The moment the Palomalu picked that ball, tell me that in your life you've ever been in a building where you really thought the thing might fall. I mean, literally, the building's built that way. That's the kind of feeling you and I in the upper deck in Foxborough when, the Ray Rice breakthrough moment happened on that cold day and we kicked their ass. There's that moment that happens that you need to have a full stadium and you need to have that environment. And that's like whatever happens on Saturday, that environment's gone for now, and it's not coming back. We're not playing a playoff game here, playoffs. And I've said this to Ed, and I'll say this to you. There's going to be 81 nights you're going to sit out at Camden Yards now where that feeling's not going to be here for the community either. Like the Orioles are not going to have those moments where there's 48,000 and a sold-out crowd and the line out the door and, a big pitching matchup and a big moment in the 7th inning. And, that sound that we're so familiar with here through winning, that sound that only comes on those big nights and those big games. That's got to change, bro. That's got to change, And
but you just said it. It comes with winning. Well, the Ravens, they haven't played a home playoff game since 2012. It's been a while. The Orioles, they've had success here over the last 6 years, but it hasn't been incredible championship success. They won a division title. The Delman Young moment was up there with anything that wasn't a championship moment as far as hearing the reaction. That reaction, that was one of those, you mentioned Palomalu's pick in Pittsburgh and how that crowd sounded, or we talked about Tony Banks to Shannon Sharp. That was right there. That one singular moment was right there as far as crowd noise. But, it comes down to it. You got to have big games and you have to have big moments. And, the Ravens, while they haven't been terrible over the last 5 years, they haven't necessarily had that gigantic moment at home here over the last few years, and it's not going to come against Jacoby Brissett. It's not going to come against, unless the good Bengals show up in Week 17. It's not going to come then. So I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree, but at the same time, I think you have to have that special moment in place to even have the crowd react that way. And then if it's going to happen, do you have all the fans do you have all the seats filled? So, there's a couple layers to that, but I hear what you're saying, and I don't think I don't think this is a trend that's irreversible by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think some adjustments need to be made, and some of it might have to be adjusting your pricing or whatever it might be. We've talked about it a lot. It's expensive. Like I said, if the Ravens take care of business the next couple weeks, make it to the playoffs, maybe they make it to the second round, and they're playing a Pittsburgh or a New England, and whether they win or not, that's kind of where the Ravens were in the first half of the John Harbaugh era. They didn't make it to the Super Bowl every year. They didn't make it to the AFC Championship every year. The expectation on an annual basis was to make the playoffs and win a playoff game. And if the Ravens can at least do that, then I think it helps things. Do I think that automatically means they have 71,000 actual butts in seats every game next year? No, not that alone, but I think it certainly can help to maybe remove some of the malaise, some of the indifference that we've seen about the Ravens over the last few years, with them kind of hovering around 500 more so than being one of the top teams in football.
All right, I'm going to wrap this thing up. Pro Bowl, and then I want to get on to Machado briefly. Start with the Pro Bowl and Tucker and Cook. I mean, what? It's nice that the veteran guys have been honored thusly, and they have played well. And we've talked about Suggs and Weddle, quite frankly, all week. And you know of my affinity, and I know of yours for C.J. Mosley as well. So good on all those cats. But the Tucker thing blows my mind.
Yeah, first, to speak on those three guys, I like seeing Suggs get in. I think he's had his best season in years. I could tell talking to him before the Pro Bowl announcements came out Tuesday evening that it mattered to him to receive that recognition at age 35 in his 15th season. Mosley and Weddle, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, and you know this very well. I mean, once you get into the Pro Bowl, it's kind of a fraternity.
Sure.
And you kind of have a reputation, and unless you have an injury-riddled season or you just have a really, really, really bad season, you're going to make it.
You become grandfather to some degree. Yeah.
To tell you that I think Eric Weddle's been the best safety in the AFC and C.J. Mosley's definitely been the best middle linebacker in the AFC, I don't know if I could say that. I mean, first of all, full disclosure, I don't watch every single team every single week, so it's really difficult to do these evaluations. And
well, that's why all the more reason to let the professionals at Pro Football Focus, and I'll reach to Steve Palazzolo and get him on and some of our pals there, but that's what they do, right? I mean, they do that.
And what's interesting about that, I mean, the way this works, everyone talks about the fans, but coaches, other than the opponents that they're playing, they're not watching other teams. They're not watching teams. John Harbaugh hasn't watched the Atlanta Falcons all year, other than maybe on Monday Night Football for 10 minutes. So, as far as the voting with coaches and players, it is what it is. It's the Pro Bowl. It's a nice little honor. Is it gospel? Absolutely not. And certainly when you start getting into alternates, I mean, the best example was Jeremy Zuda going to the Pro Bowl last year as whatever alternate he was. He's not even in the league anymore. And not because he retired, it's because no one wants him. So
that's weird. Your last game in a uniform's in
the
Pro Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm
probably not the only one though. The way out the door, one way or another, that gets a tip of the cap. Because I mean, come on, dude, you and I are going to be sitting in Minnesota, freezing our asses off the first night, making fun of the Pro Bowl because it's an annual tradition to do that.
No doubt.
We should definitely do it with more alcohol this year, I think.
I'm up for that. But the two names you mentioned, Justin Tucker, look, it is almost a universal consensus that Justin Tucker is the best kicker in the NFL. But here's what happened. Much like the best hitter in baseball can have that year where they don't have a lot of clutch situations, they don't have as many runners in scoring position to drive in runs, and maybe their RBI total's down because they're playing on a bad team. And what do we say? Well, that guy's not as good as player B because player B had 25 more RBIs that season. When we know, if you really dig into it, that first player is still the superior player by a lot. Look, Tucker's better than Chris Boswell, but here's the thing. Chris Boswell has made 4 game-winning kicks in the final minute this year. Justin Tucker has not had an opportunity, and that's not his fault, has not had an opportunity to kick a game-winning field goal in the fourth quarter all season.
It's almost like saying, well, let Paul Mero play the All-Star game this year because Frank Thomas is going to be there, and McGuire and those other guys are going to, it's like Tucker's going to be the guy the next 10 years. So
it's basically Michael Jordan and LeBron James not winning the MVP every single year. I mean, Justin Tucker, he's on the track right now that if he continues this for the next decade, he's going to be considered the greatest kicker in the history of the NFL. I mean, that's what kind of course he's on. Now, he has to continue on that, but that's where he is. But in this case, Boswell made, 3 game-winning kicks in prime time? I mean, and Boswell's had a really good year, and give him some credit. There's no doubt about that, but Justin Tucker deserved it. But I guarantee you that's what it came down to. Boswell's been in nationally televised games where he's made game-winning kicks either at the gun or the final minute. Did it against Green Bay, did it against Cincinnati, did it against the Ravens in the final minute. So I can see why that happened. Sam Cook, I mean, Brett Kern, the Tennessee kicker or punter who ended up getting the nod for the conference, I mean, he's leading the league in gross and net average. He's got a big leg. He doesn't have nearly as many punts inside the 20 as Sam Cook. I'm not quite as worked up about that one. I would have liked to see Sam make it. I think he's deserving, certainly. His placement as a punter is just unbelievable. But, again, we're talking about something where, players and coaches, unless you're playing that team, you're not watching these guys. So you kind of tend to gravitate to stats. That's why Eric Weddle's the starting free safety, because he has 6 interceptions. I don't think he's necessarily been the best safety in the in the AFC this year. Same thing with Kern. You can talk about Mosley. He's in the top 5 in tackles. I don't know if I'd say CJ's had a great year. I think he's certainly had a good year. I don't know if this has been his best year. And the Pittsburgh game was kind of a nice, a strike against him in that regard. So it is what it is. The Pro Bowl is not gospel. I think it makes for great discussion because guys like you and me are talking about it, and plenty of people are picking up their coffee.
We've already spent 4 more minutes on it than I ever really wanted to.
Yeah. So I mean, I see why. I saw why the Justin Tucker snub happened. I don't necessarily agree with it, but again, I equate it to that great hitter who, for whatever reason, either he's on a bad team or just hasn't had as many RBI opportunities, and that ended up being the difference for him, even though he's still the best kicker in the NFL.
All right, Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and of course, when Manny Machado gets traded, he's going to text it to you. It's going to be all brought to you by Coons Florida Security Boulevard. Dude, anything you want to say in 2 minutes or less without beating the horse dead, but I mean, I don't want to say I told you so, but I mean, to find this match, we knew this was needle in a haystack, especially if you're not going to deal with the Yankees and the Red Sox. You sort of eliminate half the audience. St. Louis is sort of eliminated. I don't know that they're going to get anything of requisite value. And then the whole point of I'd love to be the fly on the wall or the birdie in the window when, Dan Duquette has to walk into a 90-year-old man and explain to him how this left-hander at high A ball at, playing in Palmetto State or whatever is going to be the next Mike Flanagan or Jim Palmer or Mike Boddicker or whatever he would say to convince ownership that the trade is a good trade and good value. It's the whole thing's laughable. It's disgraceful, and I would make fun of it if it didn't affect our summer.
Well, it comes down to this. I mean, first of all, no one should be surprised that it's taking. Even if this team ends up pulling off a trade and getting a great haul that sets them up, no one should be surprised that it's taking a long time because that's just how even when the Orioles do things correctly, it's rarely done promptly or swiftly. I mean, that's just how they operate, and it's very clear.
And I'm glad I pointed out in my Ghost of Baltimore Football Pass that there is a different bar for the Orioles than there is for the Ravens. There just is.
There is.
I've spent my life trying to examine it, and I can't. But, Well, it's like having 2 different children and 2 different expectations for them.
Well, it's that one child who had straight A's and goes on and has a good job and a good career, and then the other one who kind of struggles through school mightily and maybe gets in trouble, gets thrown in jail.
Maybe runs off to Saratoga and gets lost for a few summers. Yeah, that sort of thing.
And then they straighten themselves out a little bit for a few years. You're proud of them. And, but getting back, we're getting off topic here a little bit, but I think
not really, because they have bought themselves a little bit they're not getting made fun of in the same way they would have 5 years ago if they didn't play playoff games and run you and me to Kansas City, right?
Yeah, right. But my point is, I never expected a deal to get done quickly, even if a deal does get done. And this is the one time a year, unlike the trade deadline, unlike in-season kind of things. This is the one, unlike trying to sign a free agent. This is the one thing that you can actually afford to take your time a little bit because Manny Machado's trade value now is no different than it is in January or February. Now, once you get into the season, it totally changes. So I'm fine with the idea of trying to mull over offers and try to get the best possible offer you can get, but it goes back to the question of even if you get an offer that you feel is good, and whoever is making that determination, whether it's Dan Duquette, Brady Anderson, Lou Angelos, I don't know. I've said from the start, my biggest problem right off the bat is having Dan Duquette being the one to facilitate this because he's a lame duck GM. I mean, it's bad. It's not, because he has no vested interest in what happens to this team beyond next year. And why would he? Because he's not signed through next year. He's no different than Manny Machado in that regard. But that point aside, even if you get a deal that you feel at least there's some consensus within the organization that, okay, we can work with this, we can live with this, we think we can be successful, and we're going to get a couple pieces here that really can help us over the next 5 years. Even if you get to that point, does Peter Angelos approve it or not? And I saw Jim Bowden talking about, reported that on Tuesday. It's not really a report. We know that. I mean, everyone knows that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's like this is breaking news that Angelos is nuts. I mean, come on, man.
And that doesn't mean he is going to block a trade, but we certainly know that's possible because that's happened in the past with potential deals. So that's that aside. I mean, it really does come down to, at some point you kind of have to make a decision here because you're holding up your own off season. You're holding up the off season of other teams. I mean, it's just,
but the time also eliminates possibilities. I mean, St. Louis probably would have been hot and bothered to make a deal last Wednesday in the middle of the meetings, and whatever haul the Marlins got, there would have been something sort of similar. So, for the astute guy like you, 5 years from now, you'll be monitoring those kids' names that came in that deal and finding out where they are, and everyone will be measuring the Marlins. And who the hell knows? Manny Machado might get $392 million from the Marlins to go down there and play for them next year under the guise that some of those guys will work out. I mean, how all these pieces fit together, that's for the book 10 years from now. But you can rest assured that when you're in the middle of it, there's nothing about it from the Orioles' perspective that guys like you or me can make sense of or say these are good decisions, because they're not.
The good decision would have been trading Manny Machado last offseason.
Or signing him 3 years ago after he blew out his second knee and buying out a couple of years, or if you could have, or whatever. But,
the story goes that they made an attempt, and now, but how enthusiastic was it? Was it a lowball offer?
Come on, they've been making those allegations for years. I mean, they've bid on every Mark Teixeira, every CC Sabathia, everybody that's ever been out there, and they just happen to come up $20 million short, and the fact that pitchers don't want to pitch here,
right.
The whole thing's got lopsided again, where they're really going to have a hard time ever getting a Tejada and a Javi Lopez to sign up here again, because they're going the other way, and if they don't draft through it, like the Astros proved and other teams, they're not going to be able to buy baseball players to come here. They can't even keep the ones they have right now.
But the reality is, you have to do that. Period. The Yankees are in the position they're in now, not because they spent $200 million. It's because they've retooled their farm system very well. They've drafted well. They made some savvy trades when they realized that their window with that previous group was over, and they didn't even rebuild. They reloaded. Now, the Yankees might be in a position, because they do have unlimited funds to a dramatic degree, and they're willing to spend more than anyone else, that they don't have to go through that. But there's a way to do this if you're the Orioles, or there could have been a way to do this if you're the Orioles. If you had traded Manny Machado and Zach Britton last offseason, you know what? You probably would have finished in last place this year. But guess what? You finished in last place with those guys this past year. If you had traded those two guys when they were at peak value, and let's say just made a couple other savvy moves, not re-signed Mark Trumbo, let's throw that in there as well,
and Chris Davis, but that
could have been ready, could have been in prime position to compete for a wild card this year, maybe next year. I mean, I don't think it necessarily would have been a 6 years of being absolutely dreadful, because I think you could have fetched an amazing return for 2 years of Manny Machado and 2 years of Zach Britton, coming off of the best season ever for a reliever. So, that said, that's ancient history now. You can't do anything to change that. What are you going to do? Find a deal, make a deal for Machado, make a deal for Zach Britton. I think this idea of keeping Britton or Brock makes no sense to me. They're both going to be free agents. Trade them both. I think between them, you might be able to get a couple good pieces. And, it doesn't mean franchise-altering type pieces, but you might be able to get a couple guys that are cheap, controllable, and might be a part of your next winning team in, say, 3 years, you hope, whatever it is. So, I mean, it just comes down to, you need to have a vision here, and that's what bothers me more than anything else. Is what is the vision here? I mean, the fact that they're still saying that they want to be competitive in 2018, well, how are you doing that when you trade Manny Machado? That's not happening. It's just not. I mean, I don't care if you trade for the next coming of Pedro Martinez in the return. You're not contending next year without Manny Machado. You didn't contend this past year all that seriously without Manny Machado, or with Manny Machado. So, there's just no vision here. It just feels like they're making it up as they go along.
Because they are.
And that's so sad, because unlike 2004 or 2007 or 2009, there actually were some pieces here that, some depreciating assets that you could have traded much sooner and not had a dramatic tumble the way that it's looking like it's going to be, where they fall off a cliff after next year and losing.
Well, and it's also not real good for signing Jonathan Scope, or even signing Dylan Bundy if he wins 18 games and miraculously looks like a #1 this year. It doesn't encourage the next generation to stick around, and it certainly doesn't encourage the fan base. Luke, you know what? We're going to talk more about this, and I know you got your finger on the button on Machado, and if anything happens, we'll get it first in the WNST text service. Dude, have a good holiday. We'll see you at the ballpark. We'll be following along on Twitter and Facebook and all that good stuff as we get near the game this weekend, and you celebrate with your family as well. Looked like you had a good time in New York.
I did. Merry Christmas to you, and certainly I'll be seeing you, and enjoy the holiday season, everyone.
Have some eggnog. There he goes, Baltimore Luke at WNST.net. I'm out in the Toyota.com. Audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. Just sign up and it comes. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Streaming live right here on our Facebook Live in my ho-ho purple Christmas hat. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.